What do you mean I triangle in relationships? Hey you, can you believe that they told me I triangle in my relationships? That's what we're talking about today as we continue our sermon series called Faith and Family Dysfunction. We are looking at one of the first families in the Bible, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and Joseph, and seeing their dysfunction and how God works through their dysfunction and He can work through ours as well. Today's dysfunction is called triangulation. You guys know what that is? It's pretty easy to understand, and we do it all the time. In the book Boundaries by Henry Cloud, he defines triangulation in this way. Triangulation is a failure to resolve conflict between two persons, pulling in a third to take sides. we use this dysfunction so much, it's almost like we're a fan of it. We're like, I just want to have this dysfunction. We see this dysfunction a lot in all kinds of pop culture. One of them specifically is the show Survivor. It's been on for years. The idea behind Survivor is that everyone's on this island and they have to vote each other off. So you have to be kind of the last one standing and have the people vote for you at the end. Well, there's this one guy named Russell who's always causing problems, and he always made it to the end of the show. But before he would make it there, he never won it because he always triangulated. He always caused havoc. He would pit people against each other. He would do all of this in order to win, but he would never win because all he did is cause havoc. So we can laugh off Russell as some TV star and, oh man, if he hadn't triangulated, maybe he'd do better. But we do this all the time. I mean, you remember growing up, the easiest one to show is when we were kids and we would go ask dad for something and then he would say no and me and the sibling would look at each other. It's like, oh, well, let's go ask mom, right? And how did that work for you? As soon as they found out that you were asking different people, never went well, did it? And we see this even happens today when you get an argument with your spouse and you get angry at one another, and then what does you do sometimes? Run off and go tell your mother or your father or something, and then you triangulate them involved. Like, you brought your mother into this? Oh my. It turns out bad. And listen, if you are on the parent end of that, where you're allowing yourself to be triangulated into it, step aside from all of that. Nothing good can happen from that. Triangulation is just the definition of easy dysfunction. The problem with it is that it doesn't cause us to get any better. It doesn't cause us to change. It doesn't cause us to bring forgiveness into the situations. And usually because of triangulations, it allows us to entrench in our sides and almost enter like an echo chamber, and it's easy to make enemies then. We bring the triangle and that third party in for comfort and validation in how we are feeling when we are too afraid to confront the original person. And it always ends up in dysfunction and chaos. And we see this with Isaac and his wife Rebecca. Remember all these patriarchs, you have Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Well, Isaac is Abraham's son and his wife is named Rebecca. And it all goes back to when Rebecca was pregnant. She was pregnant with twins, and the twins one day were just wrestling fiercely inside of her womb. And she goes and asks God, what is going on with these two babies in my womb? And God says to her, 2 nations are in your womb, and 2 people from within you shall be divided. The one shall be stronger than the other, and the older shall serve the younger. The older shall serve the younger. What a weird thing to say. But let's look a little bit closer at that prophecy. The older shall serve the younger. Now, everything was set up in the world back then. We all know this, that everything would kind of go to the older sibling when the parents would die. But this prophecy turns that idea on its head. So what does that mean? What does it mean for the older one to serve the younger? What does that sound like? Me personally, I think that sounds a lot about how God works in the world. I think that sounds a lot like the gospel. That the patterns of our sinful world, that no matter how entrenched they are in our society, can be turned around to serve God's purposes and serve the world and creation. And it seems that all of our knowledge and clarity of thought do nothing in the grand scheme of what God is doing. The older serving the younger. It's like foolishness, right? It sounds stupid. It sounds ridiculous. And that's exactly what God does. And this is exactly how God works. I mean, look at all the stories in Genesis and throughout all the Bible. Like Abraham, he was a great father who had no children. That doesn't make any sense. And it just continues on. Even Jesus' stories are like this. I mean, normally when you have someone that has the following like Jesus is, normally they come marching into Rome like a big insurrectionist with clubs and people yelling and screaming, wanting to violently overthrow the government and everything like that. But instead, Jesus comes in not to take over Rome. He doesn't even come in to take over Jerusalem, but he comes as a servant. He comes as God's servant, serving the very creation itself with his own life. The older creator of the world, serving the younger creation. So let me ask you something. This is all kind of talking about pride. How's your pride? How's your endless search for power and meaning going? Are you able to humble yourself and go to the person that you actually have a beef with? Or will you still search for pride and meaning and triangulate someone in to talk about that person? So we see, as we fast forward, we see the prophecy is beginning to be fulfilled, that the older will serve the younger. And one day, Esau is out hunting one of the twins, and he's famished. And he comes in, and his brother has some soup on the boil. He goes, "I'm so hungry. Give me some of that soup, Jacob." And Jacob, being wily, says, "I will for your birthright." And he sells it to him. He gives him his birthright just for some soup because he's famished. And we begin to see that prophecy work out. The Esau, over just a small price, sells all of his inheritance and future blessings that he has. And at this point, it almost sounds like a version of Jesus' story of the parable of the prodigal son. But Esau here is still proud, and he's acting in his pridefulness. You could see these kind of peacocking around, that he thinks that, oh yeah, whatever happens, I'm always the oldest one. So if I sell you the birthright, doesn't really matter. And we see that his pride is beginning to cause bitterness in the family. He even does this with his wives that he chooses. You can read all about that. But Esau is on this path of just causing bitterness and hatred in this family. And that's what we're going to talk about next week as we go forward here. And this next part of the story is where the triangulation happens. We don't really know what's up here, but Isaac, the father, asks Esau, the older son, to come in for a blessing. But before that, he goes, before I give you the blessing, I want you to go out and hunt some really incredible game, get some of that deer, get some, something like that, and I want you to stew it up for me and bring it in here. And when I eat the stew, then I will give you the blessing. But remember, Esau sold his birthright, the right to that blessing, to Jacob already. What, does Isaac not know that? Does his father not know that? That's weird, right? And also, the Lord has prophesied to his mother, Rebekah, that the older will serve the younger. Anyways, for whatever reason, Isaac calls Esau in for the blessing and tells him to get the food, and then he'll receive this blessing. And this is where the problem begins, because Rebekah doesn't believe that this should happen. But she begins to triangulate in order to get her way. And even though she's following the prophecy of Yahweh, she's following the prophecy of God, she tells Jacob, the younger son, and she tells him to dress up like his brother Esau, and he cooks up some food, gives it to his father Isaac, and he steals Esau's blessing. And from that point on, huge bitterness enters into the family. Bitterness comes in and creates dysfunction all around because Jacob has stolen the blessing from Esau. even though it accomplishes what God had prophesied, how Rebekah goes about doing it ends up tearing the family completely apart. She could have gone directly to Isaac and talked to him about what God had said, but she didn't. Instead, her actions in triangulation has caused a huge amount of dysfunction and bitterness in the family. And we see this all the times too. We use triangulation all the time. And when it happens, things fall apart. They descend into chaos and dysfunction. And we need to stop using triangulation. We don't need to go to a third party when we can go directly to the person that has offended us. Because you see, this whole thing we're talking about is a pride and power issue. And we're people of the gospel. We're people of the good news. We're people of Jesus. And you see, the gospel story, the story that we claim in our lives, always has us going against pride, always has us going against power, always has us seeking to be the servant and taking up our crosses. You see, Rebekah in our story, her pride gets in the way and it causes dysfunction. This whole thing is about pride because when we go to the person who has offended us or caused us problems, and we do it and we want reconciliation or forgiveness, that's a humble moment. It's not a power play. We're not trying to win the day then. We're trying to be reconciled. No, the prideful moment is the second that you go and talk to someone else about the problem with that person. Because when you are doing that, all you're doing is seeking validation for how you are feeling. And when you're seeking validation, all you're doing is stroking your own pride, your own ego. When you are looking to someone else, you are simply looking for someone to get angry with you so that in their anger you can say, oh yeah, the problem isn't all that much my fault. It's not my fault, it's theirs. And they are validating that sinful feeling inside of you. It's not healthy. And it's just our pride that we are stoking, and it's got to stop. So who do you need to go talk to directly? Who have you been stroking your own pride with by adding them into the triangle of dysfunction? Who do you need to go and talk to? Who do you need to go talk to directly? Maybe even this afternoon. You see, this going and talking directly is how God deals with us. He's got a major problem with you, people. He's got a problem with our sin and our dysfunction and how we constantly are triangulating people into our own dysfunction. But God directly deals with it. God comes as the Son, comes into the world to take on and deal with the justice of our sin. God himself humbles himself all the way to the point of the creation, to the point of man, to deal with our sin. He deals with the problem of our sin directly by dying on the cross. But he doesn't stay dead. He continues dealing with it by rising again and giving us that same resurrection that we may rise above all the dysfunction and sin that we have caused in our own lives. And that's really good news for us. And you can see by how God works that he uses the gospel message, uses the pattern of the kingdom of God, uses the humble to shame the proud. And he deals directly with them. And he gives us cause not to worry. That we know we can go directly to God because he comes directly to us. It's finished, right? And Jesus, when God is around as this humble servant, Jesus, and before he's crucified, he actually gives us and shows us this heart of God and how we can pattern our own lives after him. It's found in Matthew 18. He tells us not to triangulate. Here's verse 15. If your brother or sister sins, go and point out their fault. Just between the two of you. If they listen to you, you've won them back. Great. Here are some, and if you continue reading, it tells about instructions, and it's all about not kicking someone out, but maintaining the relationships, dealing with the dysfunction, bringing people back together again, going against dysfunction. And that whole section ends with a promise. It says this, For where two or three are gathered in my name, there I am also. So God has dealt directly with you. So follow him. Follow him and deal directly with the people that have dealt us wrong. Don't triangulate. He has completely forgiven you directly. He's completely forgiven you of everything that you have done wrong. So let's then bring that forgiveness to the neighbors around us. Listen, it may seem hard, it may seem difficult, but God is with you because he has promised us that whether two or three are gathered, he is in your midst as well, bringing life and forgiveness and reconciliation to all those people there as the source of love and forgiveness. So don't be afraid. God has forgiven you, and you will always be reconciled with him. So have life in him and maybe break the dysfunction this week. Have peace, everybody, and we'll see you soon.